when we get to the plan itself, there are a number of issues that are highlighted, and the recommendation that I want the meeting to adopt today is, and it enables us to actually consider all of the issues, is set out on the agenda on page 17. Sorry, not page 17, on page 13 to page 23, which is essentially the Mayor's proposal, and what that does is highlight for you all the issues that we are seeking feedback on. The proposal obviously looks at the balancing act that has been conducted, but also looks at water use, a much more focused debate on water use. I think last year with the annual plan, we got caught up in an unfortunate process which made it look as if we were allowing people who had more expensive properties to use more water, and that was not the intention. The intention is simply to identify households using more than 700 litres a day, with the average household using 540 litres a day. The intention behind this is very much to get people focused on what they're using their water for. It's to focus attention on conservation, and I think that I know that Councillor Kewen has raised it many times about the extent of the difference between Christchurch and its water use per household and places like Auckland and Wellington, other places that have excess water charges or full water use based rates, utilisation rates. The heritage area is something that I've particularly focused on, but we've had a plea from the Arts Centre to ask the citizens of Christchurch if they would contribute to the cost of getting the reinstatement of the buildings that they're working on at the moment completed, and through a targeted rate it enables us to look at heritage when we're investing in those heritage buildings, that once the work is completed then the rate disappears. So these are contained within the rates at the moment. They pull out and are time limited in that regard. The Otakuro Avon River corridor, this is a precious piece of land, a real legacy opportunity, but for me it's been very much a focus on not wanting to see the funds put into a program which can then be lifted out and put into other parts of the program. It's actually to ring fence the support that's required for delivering on that. Water, wastewater, climate action, solid waste and resource recovery, facilities, investing in parks, rates, borrowing, government support, social and economic recovery post-COVID-19, and a generic overview. So I think the Mayor's proposal gives us the basis for the debate on the issues that we might want to raise today. But as I say, there's a whole several months where we are receiving, or weeks where we're receiving feedback from our communities, and then there are the hearings of the submissions, different engagement opportunities with the public, and then finally decisions to be made in June. So it's a process that we're really kicking off the public part of today. So I'd like to invite staff to present the report that we have in front of us today. Obviously there are requirements under the Local Government Act that we need to meet, and I'd be very grateful. I'm not sure whether it's Di or Peter that's introducing the report today. Peter said Di and Di said Peter, so Di's
like
the boss,
me.
so it's Peter.
Good morning.
Peter.
Good morning. Look, the Chief Executive has asked me to spend a few moments at the beginning of this to frame where we've come from. It's just a good way to understand the depth of the process we followed here. This LTP actually began 18 months ago in September of 2019, which feels like a hell of a long time ago. It began with the Mayor and Councillor's letter of expectation, which set out a very clear framework for what was expected. The bottom line of that was transparency, accountability, and a good balance. Now, that balance feature we didn't understand at the time was going to be tougher than it sounded, because we didn't know about COVID, we didn't know about 2 annual plans, we didn't know about the airport dividends, we didn't know a lot of things at that point. But construction began, and it was the fact that we started early, and much earlier than we ever have before, that meant that when we hit COVID and lockdowns, staff were in a position to keep working, which they did. Right through the whole lockdown period, the activity plans, asset plans and so forth were being built. That meant that by the middle of next year, when we started to get our heads around what COVID meant, that we actually had a draft LTP to deal with. Not everything was there, but much of it was. The bottom line of that level of preparation meant that you did get to see every budget, every level of service. You got to go through the capital program ad nauseum, ad infinitum to get it right where you wanted it. The situation was evolving as we watched the LTP evolve. So there's a degree of flexibility right to the end of where we got to. The end result is that you're seeing stuff you've never seen before. For example, the asset plans have never been through council before. They've never been adopted with the LTP before. There have been a lot of adjustments and reductions to the volume of levels of service, so they're clearer. You've had greater transparency around the asset plans and activity plans than ever before. Where we find ourselves is in an unusual place in that for the past decade, we've been dealing largely with looking back at earthquake impacts. This LTP doesn't really do that, it looks forward. But it's created, we're at an unusual set of circumstances whereby the big projects of the city are committed to, they've been consulted upon with both the Crown and the public. So things like Metro Sports are already there. And other things are already committed to as well, either by deliberate choice or by necessity. We must renew our assets according to the guidelines. The instruction from council was to protect core levels of service, especially around things like roading and 3 waters. So they're things that can't be compromised. We have money from the Crown for roading and water, and we're not going to look at a gift horse in the mouth and not take and spend and use that money wisely. So in other words, there are a lot of things that we are in the must-do space. But equally, the financial prudence guidelines around how we handle our financials and the headroom we leave ourselves to deal with another event, should one occur, and our debt levels and so forth, they haven't moved, which means that our financial position and parameters are heavily committed. The things we're going to go and build are heavily committed. We actually have less room in this LTP for freedom of choice than many people might imagine. And that, I mention that because it frames what you see in the consultation document. So that's how we got here. We're still working with Audit New Zealand on the consultation document to get some of the very fine points around that sorted. You received a new copy yesterday that has been updated. Just very quickly, as I mentioned earlier today, the changes that you've seen to that document from the one released in the first report are to put a very clear summary at the front of what our proposal is, to provide the reader with the things we didn't put in our proposed approach to the LTP and why, and how they work, and what the negative consequences of those things would be, so that if they disagree with the council's proposal, they can make an informed decision about what they would like to see done differently, and what those options were and why council didn't use them. So they can make an informed submission to council about what we didn't put in our proposal as much as what that we did. As well as that, we've made some other changes to the CD to bring it closer into line to what Audit's looking for. So that's the task in front of council today. I will say that I haven't seen in any of the LTPs since 2005, when they began in New Zealand, the level of detail to which both OPEX and CAPEX have been worked through by the councillors and by staff. There's been about 100 hours of councillor time devoted to mostly those two topics. And I realise that at times some of it may have seemed a bit painful or repetitive, but what it means is that council has arrived at a proposal which, given the loss of dividends from the airport and the impacts of COVID, has delivered a rates figure that compares favourably with a lot of councils, delivers a capital program which is almost at the absolute capacity of what we can meaningfully build. We don't want to plan for something we know we can't deliver. Has protected core levels of service, has preserved the headroom we need in the event of another crisis, and has kept our debt levels prudent. So that's the optimum position, the sweet spot, whatever you want to call it. And that's what we're putting out in the staff and councillor recommended proposal. So that's really the summary of how we got here and what we've got to.
Are there questions for staff? Sarah, I know that you had a question.
Thank you. I've got a couple of small bits from there, but I'll actually just go back to what you were saying earlier about our position with COVID. And I know that during the annual plan last year, we made sort of the $18 million worth of operational savings and deferred a whole pile of capital. We've lost dividends, we had to borrow more to cover shortfall from our facilities, those kind of things. What position would we have been in had it not been for COVID? Like what, if we'd still been getting the same dividends, made the same sort of savings that we'd made in the annual plan, long-term plan, where would we be at?
Thank you, Councillor. I've got Bruce is just looking up the detail of that email that he sent to you.
Yeah.
So I'll ask him to join us here at the table.
I don't think we can easily answer that question. Because there were a number of things we did as a response to COVID, and the question would be, would we have done those things? Would we have gone to CCHL and asked for more dividend if we hadn't had COVID? And,
but if we look at the actual impact, so if we had had the same sort of dividends, and we hadn't had to borrow the money for our facilities, but we had gone through the same process that we have had this time and made the significant amount of savings and deferred capital, do we have an idea where that might have put us?
well, certainly, if we hadn't lost so much dividend, the rates increases would have been lower. That may well have just been effectively rate increases that have been brought forward that would have been incurred in later years will be part of the answer. So some of the rate increases out in probably 25, 26 have come forward because of COVID, but there would also be probably some permanent, I'd be guessing, but we could have been looking at a 3 or 4% rate increase this year rather than 5.5%.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. And just there's a couple of small things. The sustainability grant, the sustainability fund. There's a line in the grants and funds page which shows the Innovation and Sustainability Fund, which was the old name, completely gone. The consultation document has $380,000 for the sustainability fund, but it's not showing in the grants and funds section.
No, it was 400,000, and it was funded from the Capital Endowment Fund, which was why it was showing lower down. It continues. It's taken a 5% haircut, so it's at 380,000, and it goes through till 2025.
It is there, but it's currently caught up in the strengthening communities.
It's showing in the contestable strengthening communities grants line.
But that will be pulled out separately for the
yes, we'll
full
report it
documents.
separately. We've simply bundled it up into that top line, and we should have kept it separately.
And the heritage one includes intangibles, so we'll be able to list those ones separately because we do have
biodiversity of 190,000, which goes right across all 10 years, is also in that strengthening communities line. We'll separate that out and
separate them all out. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
I've got Yanni, then Sam.
Thank you. I'm just interested in the additional money that's been put on for the stadium amenity. It's not been called out in any way that people can understand it. I think it's about 25 million. Why have we not explicitly highlighted that?
I'm not sure what the right answer is there, except that possibly, is it something we've consulted upon already?
No, it's new money in the tens of millions. I think it's about 25 or 26 million. And it's to enhance the streets around the stadium. So apparently it's not part of the stadium project, but it's additional spend. It's significant, and it just seems weird that it's not highlighted as something that people should be aware of.
Well, that's certainly something we could have a look at.
Okay. Just the other question I had was really in some of the report, particularly on page 20 of the introduction, it makes reference to the organics plant upgrade being in response to complaints. But I think we actually need to be a lot more detailed around the fact that that's actually a breach of contract by the operator who's responsible for meeting the consent, and therefore we have a legal requirement to respond to ECAN. So I just wondered if that section can be amended to be very explicit that actually it's not about the complaints actually have been there, but actually it's about the fact that actually the complaints have been substantiated by the regulatory authority, which requires us to take action.
Yeah. This is in the Mayor's proposal, and I think Yanni's raised a good point. So I would like the words to be, sort of accurately describe what happened. So not that we're doing this in response to complaints, that we did this in response to action, or notice from ECAN. We just need the correct words that are placed in there. And I know that subsequent to us making the decision, an abatement notice was served in order to ensure that we were delivering on that. So even with the subsequent reference to the subsequent issuing of the abatement notice, I think would satisfy Yanni's concern. Is that all right? Yep. Good.
Understood.
Yep. Thank you.
I just had two more questions.
Two more. Yep.
One was in regards to the Capital Acceleration Fund. I'm kind of trying to understand, like in terms of the plan, we're highlighting that we're going to do it, but it's not really up for submissions, is it? We've got a separate process underway, which kind of surprised me why we've got a separate process to engage the community. But in terms of the LTP, where we've highlighted the that expenditure, that's going to happen. That's not up for change, or there's no way we can amend that.
I'm not sure what you would consult on.
What I'm concerned about is we're currently asking people to give us a whole list of transport projects for the acceleration fund, and if it comes back that I'm pretty sure we'll get more demand than what we've got, then are we able to make changes as a result of that?
Well, I'd have to defer to the transport planners, but I can't imagine a situation in which we wouldn't make changes based on feedback.
Except it's a separate process that's ahead of the LTP.
Yes, but the LTP doesn't spell out every project that we're going to do under CRAF.
Okay. Yep. And then finally, I just was, in terms of the water charging proposal, is there a way that the public submitters, people that are interested in the issue, can contact council now and get how much their average daily use is?
No, that information is not currently available.
So I know we've been doing some meter readings, but I'm concerned that for people to make an informed submission, unless they know what the impact is on them, it's quite hard to say whether it's something that you support or have concerns about, because you simply don't know. When would we be in a position to advise people what the latest meter readings have been of their water use?
The simple answer is I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay.
Firstly, the meter would have to be accurate, and secondly, someone would need to read it, calculate the difference, and go back to the people. So we need to find out from the water team what.
Can I just raise that as one thing that I think, because I know we've been doing the quarterly meter readings, but yeah, thanks.
But if I can just say, a reading for one quarter is not necessarily indicative of whether you're going to whether your water consumption is above the 700 litres a day, because it's expected to only apply in the summer.
Except what, as I understand it, what they do is it's the quarterly average use that they take into account. So people would still know, like for the last 3 months, for example.
Yes, but each quarter isn't necessarily indicative of the next quarter.
No, I understand that, but at least where we've already done meter readings, we're not doing it on an annual basis, we're doing the charging on a quarterly basis.
Really?
Yeah, so people would still be able to see for the last 3 months over summer, for this particular period anyway, that what they were using, which I suspect this period is probably one of the periods of high demand.
We'll work with Helen to understand what can be done in that space and come back to you.
Thanks. Cool.
Sam?
Cool. Thank you, team, for this. Just two really quick ones. Firstly, and Di, it's probably a question for you around the capital program. I know there's a proposal in there of our level of spend. Did the staff have a particular view on what that level should be? So I'm just trying to gauge the difference between, I guess, the prudent level that staff would put forward as opposed to what we've landed on by majority.
We,
Figure.
our initial recommendation for the council charge bit was around 400 million. We then recommended something slightly lower. Our key recommendation is 375, but after working with the capital group and looking at our longer term projection, we felt we could make, and you'll see that in the tables, we're still maintaining our 400 million headroom in all but 2 years, which is around the time of the stadium being delivered, which was the key period we were working through. So we have managed by other means to sort of get ourselves through that with minimal risk to the council.
Right, okay, cool, thank you. And just the other one was around the heritage grant or the heritage targeted rate. Do we have a figure on what that would be if it was just and it doesn't have to be now, even if I just get it later on, if it was a flat charge across the city, what that would be per household as opposed to the capital value charge?
Oh, we could get that, yes.
Yeah, could I get that at some stage? Thanks. Cool, thank you.
Thank you. Jimmy, and then Melanie.
One question. On page 67, consultation document, the proposed recent rule bus lounges to be closed. I remember this issue several years ago when the staff, and also council approved this one. There have two conditions concerned. First one is particular emphasis in the Central Richmond area. Every day they have 3,000 people boarding buses in the Central Richmond area. Second is the main purpose, to set up this bus, the lounge is the kind of cut the traffic congestion and making the roads safer for pedestrians. I'm concerned now, because if this bus, the lounge has been closed, whether these two, the issue of concern will be happen. If happen, how to mitigate this effect? It is my concern, because totally different from the several years ago in that kind of criteria.
I'm not sure how we can respond other than to ask Richard to address your concerns there and explain a little bit more of the rationale behind what they're doing. I can't talk to the technicals of the lounge decision myself off the hip, but we can ask Richard Osborne to come back to you on that.
Melanie?
These are around the excess water charge. One, I was just wondering if we could include the median value of or the volume of water, because it's significantly lower than the average. I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, we discussed that in the workshop.
Do we? I still think it would be useful. The other one is about the exemption. So there's 2 exemptions included, and we may have discussed this as well, but I don't recall, because it doesn't mention about exemptions for large households. So can we include that as one of the... We've just got exemptions for the water leaks and medical purpose use.
We might need to clarify here. Diane's just mentioned that she doesn't recall the exemption for large households, so
We talked about it was in last year's annual plan, and we have always talked about it.
okay. I think we need to clarify this, just to figure out where things are at.
I've also written it down in my notes and we've talked about this too.
No, I don't doubt that. I'm just wondering what the difference is between your notes and what we've got. So I need to clarify that.
It's the ability to intervene, isn't it? If there is a large household, it wasn't an automatic.
Yeah, that's correct.
No, but it would be nice to have it spelt out here, I think.
Right. Yeah.
How do you find large?
Okay. So it's just the wording that you want to see.
I would like a third bullet point, so it's page 31, 32. There would be some exemptions to the charge such as, and to include large households, or whatever the wording was we had last time.
May I just ask, how do you define large, please?
Well, maybe that's something we need to discuss, but
more
it was
than
the same
small?
as what we had last year.
More than two?
No, more than small.
So the councillor is correct in her recollection, both in terms of annual plan 2 and the discussion. So I'm just, Carolyn, it's important that Helen and Richard, because these are areas of specific technical question, they need to be in the room to be able to remind members, okay?
Yeah.
Because it does say
Right.
including.
Well, it's
not-
got, there
not
would be some
extensive.
exemptions to the charge, such as unexpected
Such as.
high use due to an
Such
unknown
as.
water leak, water use for medical purposes. But you could just put exceptionally large households. You know, I mean, it's going to be the exception. We're not, yeah, because with this is 700 litres, which is well over the average. So, all right, but I don't object to that going into the documentation. It was what we discussed. You're right, Pauline,
Thank you.
and then Jake.
Mine's just a wording issue as well on the organics processing plant, and it's relating to the expenditure over the next 10 years, but it's convoluted with the MRF. So the paragraph that reads, the first 3 years will focus on the upgrades at the organics processing plant and materials recovery facility sites. So I think we should probably make that a little bit clearer, that we're intending to upgrade the organics processing plant by January 2022, and the rest of the money will be obviously on the MRF. So if we could just differentiate between that upgrade time frame, I think it would be really helpful. Otherwise people might get upset about that. Thanks.
Sure, we can definitely make that clearer.
Jake.
Yeah, so a suggestion or a question. Given that our auditors had some sort of hiccups with that we weren't presenting enough options in terms of, from the things we discussed in briefings, uniform annual general charges and rolling those flat taxes back into a progressive tax was something we discussed and were presented with 4 different options on. Have you thought of including that in the consultation document so people could submit? I mean, that's a proposal that would reduce the rates of, I think, 87% of Christchurch residential ratepayers.
No, we didn't, because when we presented it, the consensus around the room was not to proceed, and so we didn't.
We should present some more options, though. Just signalling that that's an amendment I'd like to deal with. Maybe not today, but certainly before the 4th.
Well, we're hoping that we can get things on the table today. But I did note a question Sam asked before, and I'm interested in the answer to that question as well. Because, I mean, it is an item that we could structure a debate around today, which is, do we, it's one end of the spectrum, remove all of the uniform annual general charging that we have. It's at the lower end of the spectrum in terms of what's around the country, but it is where it is. But it does have an impact. But the other question is, should there be other elements that are added to the uniform annual general charge? We have the waste levy. We have a $20, I think it is, for active transport, is it, still, is that still on the?
Yep.
On the books, and then, but then the heritage one, I mean, I am interested in the question that Sam asked, which was, how much would that be if it were a flat charge across the city? I personally would favour that. So it looks like that could be something that could be carved up as an amendment that would enable the debate about the issue, but could pick up a broader issue, which is, could the heritage one be looked at as a flat rate as opposed to a related to the capital value of the property?
Sounds great, as long as there's some leeway, I should say, for people to discuss the issue.
yeah.
I think that's more than
Can
fair.
I just say, if we were, in order for councillors to be able to debate that issue of removing UAGCs, there would be we'd need a bit of time to recalculate what the rates are.
Yeah.
Otherwise, councillors would be trying to debate something without the information.
No, I understand that.
And
so,
that will take, I'll need to check, but they would take a little while.
as in, but we could potentially debate it this afternoon.
Potentially, but I'll have to go away and check.
Right. But anyway, we're not saying that we're definitely going to do that today, but let's just work out what that would require.
And I remind you that you do have Thursday as well if you wish to take that time.
Yeah. Andrew.
So just on that issue, if we were going to go to that debate, we need to remember that it isn't just black and white. We need to provide for some shades of grey in between as well. Not necessarily on the heritage one, but certainly on the matter that Jake's raised.
Yes.
Yeah, all right, thank you. The matter that I wanted to raise, though, by way of a question, in the CD, under the heading Service Desks, that highlights quite clearly there the proposal to close the Littleton and Akaroa service desks based on low levels of transactions, and that's made clear in the document as well. What are we referring to as transactions in that regard? Is it just financial transactions?
Again, I can't answer off the hip that level of detail, but we certainly can investigate the spreadsheet behind it and try and find out what a transaction is.
Yep.
If it's strictly a financial one, or does it cover inquiries, for example?
Yeah, I think we need to be, I mean, this is something that there will be some interest in those local communities. I think we need to be clear. So if it is financial transactions, my suggestion would be that we should say low level of financial transactions, or if it's wider than that, then maybe we need to make that clear. Second question relating, so if we can have clarification on that, that would be great. Second.
Andrew, sorry to interrupt you. I'm just wondering if Mary is able to answer that question for you.
Yeah, so we're proposing to close the service desks at Akaroa and Littleton, and it states pretty clearly in the CD that that's because of a low level of transactions. Is that just financial transactions that we're referring to when we say that?
It's mainly the financial transactions, because they're the ones that people tend to use the service centre for more. But it's also the low level of foot count as well. So it's both financial transactions and foot count into those service centres. All right.
Now that's useful to know, and it'll be useful for the local community to know that when they decide what they think about this. That's good. So second question relating to the same thing, that's called out well in the consultation document. It's very, very clear. It isn't called out on the level of service in the activities and services statement of service provision tables. I mean, I guess the argument for that could be that it's in line with the provision of 7 to 13 hubs, which is the level of service, but the level of service provision over the previous two periods referred to in that table is 12 hubs. So there may not be a difference in the target level of service, but there is a difference in the level of service proposed to be provided. Should that not be called out in that table as well?
Yeah, that's clear enough. So yeah, we could definitely look at just adding a point of clarification there that while technically it might be met, it's not the same.
Yeah, it's a change to the current level of service provision.
Yes.
Yeah, so if we can add that in, I just would hate to think that people had gone looking through parts of the document and didn't see it in the CD and therefore didn't realise it was happening.
No, fair enough.
Thank you.
Yanni, another question?
Just a few additional questions. I've just checked on that stadium support package, and we were originally advised in the project sheet was 25 million, but on the capital program, it's only listed as 5. So I don't know whether that's an error or whether money's been reduced. So I just thought that might be helpful. There's also just a bit more clarity on that. There's a number of water supply renewals. There are about $8 million. So again, like total cost of the stadium, the multi-use arena, sorry, it would be really good just to highlight what the actual cost is. And I just was going to check on the property disposal process, because we were told that it was, you know, going to be smaller ones that would be put forward, but things like the YHA, we've had no information about that as best I can tell, and yet it's been listed to be sold, the 5 Worcester Street. So there's also a number on here that haven't been to the community board, and one in particular which I know our board was looking at, which is on the list. So I'm just trying to understand that property proposal disposal list, how those things have been selected, and why there hasn't been a sort of intermediary process for us to give that feedback first. And then I had one final question around the DCs, but I'll just leave those two.
Okay. Look, on the property issue, I think that maybe the best thing would be to ask Bruce Rendell to come
Right.
later in the day.
Is it possible just to move an amendment to remove those?
Well, it might be better to have the discussion with Bruce to understand
Okay.
how things got there.
Okay, cool. And so the development contributions policy as well, like that's the one that, the whole idea of where we've got intensification happening, no projects to compensate for the environmental and amenity loss of trees, parks, that sort of thing, or outdoor space. We're kind of in a chicken and egg. We're told if we don't have something on the LTP, we can't charge development contributions, but we haven't signed off on a development contribution policy, so we don't know what projects could go in there to deal with growth. So I'm just trying to understand what the process is for us signing off on the development contributions policy and list of projects that do get DCs, when we do that, and also just want to be really clear and understand that development contribution rebate, you know, the money that's going to subsidise the residential development in the central city, when do we get a chance to support that on budget or not?
We've had the development contributions policy is going out for consultation, which will make that redundant. It will make it a redundant question due to the changes that are going to be proposed. So,
No, I thought we
but
were
I
doing
don't
this
know
part
the
of the
time
LTP.
frame. Have you got the
Brendan-
time frame in
Brendan
front
is
of you,
here.
Di?
Brendan is
I
here.
believe that's coming on the 11th, but I've just got an answer here from on DCs that you can't charge a DC for loss of amenity or streetscape improvement.
No, but the idea was that, for example, take Waltham, which we've seen massive intensification, and we don't have any capital projects to you know, cater for the growth and demand for things like the playground. I thought we could have a growth project related to the development to put in additional facilities in the area. Are you saying that we can't?
I'm saying you can't charge a development contribution on a loss of amenity,
Right.
but the policy is coming, I believe it's the 11th of March that the policy
Yeah.
is coming for
Yeah,
discussion.
Brendan's nodding, so it will be here on the 11th of March, so it will be in place in time for the conclusion of the LTP.
Only if we
Yeah.
agree with it though, because if it comes and it's missing what Yanni's saying, which I think is actually quite a discussion point, then it may not.
So, yeah, and
I
sorry,
just
what I was talking about loss of
It's
amenity,
got to go out for
I meant for the
consultation.
individual properties where you've got, you know, big houses that have trees and a backyard.
See,
suddenly
it's
have
going
nothing.
to go out
So-
for consultation. We're not here to discuss the DC policy
No, the
today.
question is, how do we add projects to cater for growth if we're not doing the DC's policy as part of this today?
Well, because it's been developed in conjunction with this and it's coming in 2 weeks.
So then that will amend the capital that can amend the capital program.
If it's not already there, then yes, you could make that change
Brendan, would
between
you
the
like to
draft
come up
and
to the
final.
table?
Just while that's happening, I should point out the DCP is no longer part of the long-term plan. It's run separately. The legislation broke it out in order to deal with just this timing issue.
Yeah.
So it is actually a separate but parallel thing with overlap, not part of the LTP.
I think the answer to your question is the capital program, which is part of the LTP. Those components of the capital program that under the legislation can be linked back to legitimate DC charges are included. So if you wanted to add projects, the time and the place to do it would be to add projects to the council's capital program, not via the DC policy per se. So you're adopting the draft capital program as part of adopting the draft LTP, and that goes out for public consultation, and you'll undoubtedly get feedback on that, and then you adopt the final LTP, which includes the final capital program. The DC policy will be finalised shortly after the council adopts the final capital program. So it will adopt the final capital program at the end of June this year, and the DC policy will come shortly thereafter, which will then reflect the capital program that the council has adopted.
Right.
Does that make sense? So the mechanism is via the capital program that you're adopting.
At a high level, the principle of where we've got traditionally the areas that are having huge intensification, so huge loss of trees and backyard space, and we've got massive development happening like Waltham. The principle around our DC's policy, which I thought we had asked for work to be done around how do you have projects like growth projects to cater for the increase in people, that can be done as part of the capital program, is what you're saying.
If you wanted to add projects to create a new playground or a new open space or something like that, then the place to do it is to add that project as part of the capital program. It's a second order question about whether that project can be funded via DCs, though. The legislation is very specific about what can be funded via DCs.
So if it can't be funded by DCs, then I don't think we'll get support from the council table to add it.
Your example of trees being taken from someone's backyard through intensification, that can't be funded via DCs.
No, but yeah, we have strategic land. We used to have a reserves budget where when new development happened, money went in, and we provided a sort of replacement of things that were happening. So, I mean, I know everything's changed, but that's fine. I'll wait for the DC's policy, amendments to the capital program based on that by the time we sign off on this.
Sorry, just to be clear, if you wanted to add capital projects, then the mechanism is probably via the capital program that you're doing as part of either the drafting of the LTP or the final LTP. You can't add capital projects at the time of adopting the DC policy.
No, and so can I suggest that the appropriate time will be, during the course of the LTP process, prior to the final LTP being adopted. If there are any additional capital projects that need to be put in that time, then that's the appropriate time to do it, rather than amend something without any background information at the front end. We'll do it.
The point is when we, I don't know if councillors, maybe the new ones will have never seen it, but when we get the DC's policy, we actually get a schedule of projects broken down by how much they qualify for development contributions versus the general rate, and so it's actually a really good way of seeing what kind of qualifies for growth and what doesn't, and how it's funded. And that's what I was expecting to get as part of the DC's policy thing that we sign off.
Yeah.
And that list is taken from the capital program that council adopts the draft, and that's exactly why we don't finalise the DC policy until after the final capital program is adopted at the end of June.
So what I'll do, I'll put forward some projects ahead of that DC schedule being done, and if we can get some assessment whether they meet the growth criteria in terms of DCs, that would be helpful.
You mean prior to it being completed, or just prior to the 11th of March for consideration?
Yeah. Well, I think we need to consult.
Are they already on our capital program?
No, they won't be.
Okay,
like
well then it needs to wait until after we go out for consultation.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. All right, Bruce, would you like to come forward and answer Yanni's other question? And I missed it, Yanni, so can you ask it again?
So I was just concerned at some of the properties on the disposal list. One's quite significant, which is 5 Worcester Boulevard.
Yeah.
We may have got a memo, but I don't recall getting anything about the YHA.
We provided guidance on that. It was to be included in the list.
Who did?
We did. It's been on the list right from the first time we saw it. YHA, 5 Rolleston Ave. Rolleston, sorry.
So what's the process to go through the community boards as well?
So before you do, Bruce, I will remind Councillor that we did have a full briefing on the process before Christmas, which is why we took a report to Council on exactly how the community boards would be engaged.
Yeah.
Can you give him the detail again, please?
Yep. So there's a set of criteria that is your criteria you've given to us. We apply that. We then circulate that list. So this has been to community boards in an informal basis, so that they can then consider that as part of their submission to the long-term plan. It's also gone to another number of other key stakeholders, such as some of the housing providers, knowing that there's interest in housing, to mana whenua as well. And then submissions are made, and council gets to consider the final, make the final decision through the long-term plan, when decisions can be made both financially as well as whether or not we need the land for any strategic purpose.
Good. Are there any other questions for staff? Aaron?
Yeah, I have a couple. One is on the land drainage targeted rate, and it's the switch from the people that are not paying it. I've just done a skim over a whole lot of properties across the city. Seems everyone pays it, and it's got a thing there. There will be a link to a map, but who is being added into that?
The main people being added in are those in rural properties, those in Banks Peninsula, and there are areas of the city within the outer suburbs who are not currently paying. Those are the key properties being added.
Right, there's hardly any in total, as in a number of properties I'm picking.
Well, there's more than you would have hoped for, which is why we want to tidy it up and get it fixed.
Right, okay. So that's that one. And then the other one is around the transport one. It's got, for the buses, the spending of, we put in 96.7 million for bus infrastructure over the next 10 years. And do we have an outcome of target numbers, like what will be the net saving of carbon for spending that amount of money? That doesn't seem to be in there anywhere. It doesn't say where we get to.
Look, sometimes
I
it's
know
tough.
there'll be a 40% increase in bus usage, was the number Richard Osborne gave us, so that takes you from 2.2 to 3% of people's trips being on the bus. But how big's the dent in our emissions, which from transport are 36%?
Look, I wish Richard were here, but I do have to take a punt at something here, which is there is a line between what council's responsible for and what other agencies do, and we're responsible for the infrastructure.
Yes.
We're not necessarily responsible for we aren't responsible for how many people do or don't use the bus service or the carbon impact of that. And the LTP, the point's been made to us from both within, by councillors and by Audit, needs to be very clear about we do what we control, and we don't build in targets around things that we don't control. So
but
I don't
we
wanna...
must be signing up to, I mean, because we declared a climate emergency, so you can't have an emergency and then not have net targets that you must get to, because if 36% of our emissions come from transport, we must be going, we'll lower it by this, this and this, which must have net targets in it, especially spending 96.7, and my next number's bigger.
I understand. I'm not trying to be bureaucratic about it so much as saying that I think your concern needs to be in the right place, which is maybe at the level of strategic directions, rather than a level of service, which is we contract to deliver X amount as a council of things that we don't actually control.
but should those numbers that were in those strategic directions with all the various agencies, should that not be in here when we're spending that much money?
I believe that a lot of that is in the strategic directions, but it's not in the levels of service, which I'm saying it's about where it is rather than the need for it. But I thought there were quite a lot of goals.
Because you spend $1, get 10 cents back, not a great investment. Spend $1, get $8 back, great investment. Because the other one is and it's the same question again, is the cycleways are in here for an extra $235.8 million. And once again, it is what is the net gain on our carbon emissions, like the reduction from that, like at the end of that 10 years, we can go, we're currently there, we will be there, because that's why we're spending $250 million.
Again, I think it's about where that information is. The climate change strategy is going out. We've got the strategic directions. I believe that kind of global ambition for the city probably sits there rather than as a level of service for staff to deliver.
But to get the public buy-in, they've got to see measurables, so they know that when we do this, this and this, we get to there. It's like, does that make sense?
The cycleway doesn't guarantee usage.
It does, but I don't want to repeat myself too much. I think it has to be in the right place. Those goals and the data around them very properly belong in things like the climate change strategy, the strategic directions, the measures around the strategic directions. But if you provide them to staff as a level of service, in the same way as make sure the grass is cut and so forth, you're at the wrong level, if you know what I mean. I'd be welcoming anybody else who wants to chip in on this.
No, but we shouldn't be spending $250 million without seeing the outcomes of the measurable outcomes of that spend. Like every year that I could get the number off the health board, but there's a number of people that die from respiratory related illnesses in Christchurch due to our air pollution. So this is imminent. This isn't in 50 or 100 years' time. People die every year. So we need to, this is a health issue as much as it's a climate issue. And we should have the measurable outcomes to say, in 10 years' time, because of these actions, this many less people die, but also we've done this for the planet.
No, I understand, but outcomes normally go in things like the community outcomes, the strategic directions, the climate change strategy is where big global outcomes for the city tend to rest. So I'm just talking about the right information in the right spot.
Right, okay. Cool. So the public won't see that when they make submissions on it, because we're going to get quarter of our submissions will be people coming in talking about climate change. That's the environment we're living in, and so they should be able to see measurables. So they go, no, I want you to spend more there and less there because that is what they want. But we must be able to measure it. You can't just say climate change. You've got to actually do something.
Yeah, the climate change strategy is being dealt with in parallel. So I think there's a bit of a difficulty in one sense because it's
so. And does that have the outcomes of where we get to for each dollar spent? Because there's people that work for the UN that do that tell you every dollar, wherever you spend it, will tell you what your outcomes will be. Like all these numbers exist.
Can I maybe clarify something? If you build cycleways, you expect an impact. There's a big difference between measuring that impact and seeing whether it's working in, say, community outcomes or the climate change strategy or whatever, and saying, we measure this and we're testing whether it worked or not, because building the cycleway doesn't guarantee that you will get the people you want.
No.
But you can test that by measuring it, but there's a big difference between measuring it and placing it on staff as a target, which is what a level of service does. One is a piece of intelligence that tells you your investment is paying off or not. The other one is a task you're placing on staff to deliver. And I'm not sure that staff can deliver reduction in carbon through cycleways. They build them. They don't guarantee what happens.
I mean, it's the same thing. There are statutory levels of service that are imposed on councils throughout the country, which the staff cannot deliver. They can't deliver them alone. Because it is a combination of effects. So that
anyone else got an alarm bell going off there?
There's a target on the number of deaths on roads, for example, which we contribute to by building safe roads, by having education programs in schools, by doing a variety of things, having cycleways. that even contributes to the number of deaths on roads.
But we don't make it demonstrably safe.
A reduction, yeah.
Yeah, but we
And
don't
so,
go for demonstrably safe.
you know, in terms of people feeling safe about being on the road and being safe on the road. So they all contribute, but they don't enable staff to deliver the levels of service. I mean, our target should be 0, but it's not the statutory target that's given to the staff of every council in the country. So, you know, I mean, I understand what Peter's saying, and I understand what you're saying. The measurable should be in the implementation plan that sits around the climate change strategy.
Yeah, because it should come down to the public should be feeding back, especially the ones that are right into it, should be feeding back on no, spend more money there, because we get a lot better bang for buck than spending it over here. Like in my ward,
Which
we're
was
going to
my
spend...
point about the climate change strategy, but perhaps it's coming to Sarah's committee shortly, so perhaps Sarah, would you like to just comment on it?
Well, I was going to ask if the approach that Aaron's suggesting, where we have a dollar for, you know, bang for your buck kind of approach when we look at the LTP, is a similar approach to we've taken to, for example, a similar level of investment in the stadium. So do we know for every dollar? I'm just.
What I'm trying to do is to guide people helpfully into a situation where and it's kind of picking up on what Peter's saying, is that the staff aren't responsible for the.
I know. So I'm just trying to draw an analogy.
And neither are they. No, but it's not a helpful analogy.
It is, because the business case for the stadium tells you how many people will go there.
But we don't know how much money.
What would be really helpful, sorry, please, what would be really helpful is if we could see our way clear to isolating where that information should be held and where those measures should be able to be found. And it seems to me that the climate change strategy with its implementation plan should actually be the place where we can see those measurable reductions in carbon.
And the climate change strategy is a high-level document. It's coming to the committee tomorrow.
Yep.
Within it, there is the zero emission transport plan, which will have all of that information. There is a transport plan working group led by Councillor Davidson that's working on all of that sort of stuff at the moment. There are expressions of interest. You could be coming along to the meetings. You'll be able to see all the data about all of those kind of things. Those meetings are open to any councillor to turn up to. So I mean, all of that information is around.
Yeah.
NZTA has all of the cost benefit stuff. We had a business case on the cycleways.
All Aaron was trying to do helpfully was to daylight the issue in the context of the spend.
Except that, I'm just going to say that if you're only isolating one project for that concept of spend and not saying we should be doing it for all projects, then there's a disparity. But we do it.
I misunderstood
for the
because I didn't
cycleways.
hear Aaron say that he was only talking about one project.
He was only mentioning the cycleways.
I think he was looking at a number of projects
in the
that
public
fall
the public,
within,
so the sustainable transport
within
stuff.
the climate
Councillor
change,
Kewen is on the working group
thing.
for the for the transport plan, so I hope he stays bold during that process too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Anyway, so I would like to think that the way that I think that it would be helpful to address the issue is to see how much of the engagement that we have on the climate change strategy is able to draw that information out into the public arena. Because I think by the time we get to the LTP, because the consultation will be completed on the climate change strategy before we conclude the LTP. So we should be in a position by the time we get to the final set of decisions on the LTP to be able to have a really clear understanding of what the investment in a whole range of different projects will do in order to achieve the carbon reductions that we need to make as a city. So, and we're not responsible for whole of them, which is why we've set a target of 2025, but it's only an aspirational target for the city because we don't simply control all of the different aspects of the city. that would enable us to achieve that. And from a council point of view, 2030, and we need to see measurable and deliverable and delivering results as we get to 2030. So, and I'm hoping that that's what the climate change strategy will help us to address. But it does need to be, as you say, wrapped into the final leg of this process so that they all come together and people can see that their investment in the capital program is producing the climate action that we want them to produce. Yeah. Sarah?
I'll just add one. If you want some data, so the average Kiwi drives 10,000 kilometres a year, and that's 2 tonnes of CO2. No, Aaron was asking for specific information. It's 2 tonnes of CO2 for every 10,000 k you bike.
Can we not try and demonstrate some form of discipline?
Okay. Thank you.
Oh, they had a service as well.
I am trying to be helpful to people to raise these issues, but are there any other issues generally? Because I might move on to the next little item. Are people generally done with questions?
Madam Chair, Helen's here. She may be able to answer Yanni's question about water meter readings.
Helen.
And Helen, can you also touch on the issue of large families, because it needs to be included in the documentation?
Yes, I've got notes on 2 or 3 things that have come up, so if it helps if I just go over those to start with.
Please.
So just a reminder, because it's some time since we had our workshop talking about water charging. So the allowance is 700 litres per day, assessed quarterly. Okay, so not over a year as we did in the annual plan proposal. It's assessed quarterly. So if you go over your average of 700 litres per day in any one quarter, then you're liable for a bill for that quarter. That allowance compares with 540 litres per household per day, which is an average use. And remember that average use includes ordinary household use and garden watering, which is a favourite activity here in Christchurch in the Garden City. So it includes that garden watering with no controls on it, if you like. A reminder that quarterly, so we are reading meters quarterly. That doesn't mean that we're going to read a quarter of the city on the 1st of March and then a quarter of the city on the 1st of June and then a quarter on the 1st of September. They will be rolling reads around the city. So you'll get your meter read not exactly every 91 days, but usually between 80 and 100 days, and it'll be averaged over that period. All right, so that's a quarterly reading and a rolling reading across the city. In terms of getting information out to households, we've started those quarterly readings already. So we're starting to get that information together, and we will be sending notices out to people so they know how much they've been using in each quarter. And most people will see that they use a relatively small amount in the winter, and if they're very keen on their use of water outdoors for gardens or swimming pools and the such, they will see their use go up in the summer. Okay, so we will get that information out to people on a rolling basis. We're also working on an app where they can get that, they can draw that information from us rather than us send it out. Now that is a work in progress, and there's no guarantee we'll get that up and running in time, and in fact there's no guarantee we'll get it up and running at all, because we just need to check with legal about whether that information is considered private. Okay, so there's a bit to work through there, but that would be the best, actually, that people can just assess it themselves. In terms of the first bill, nobody would get a bill until the first summer, so that's the summer of 2022. So if council, after hearing submissions, adopts this, then the ordinary water use through the first couple of quarters is likely to be low and within the allowance for a household, and they wouldn't get a bill until the summer. If they did get a bill earlier than that, it's more likely that it's a leak, and that's one of our exemption provisions. So if you've got an undetected leak on property, and that's leading you to use, 2,000 litres per day, and you provide evidence that you've fixed that leak, then you can get an exemption from that unexpected and ridiculous water bill. All right, so we will address the household side of the meter leaks through this process as well. So remember that exemption. And the final thing, people were asking about large families. We do not have an exemption for large families, which we did have under the annual plan proposal, and that's because the 700 litres per day is more than sufficient for ordinary household use, even for large families. So 700 litres per day is a lot of water, and we expect that large families will be able to function perfectly well with that. We have retained an exemption for medical purposes. However, again, we don't expect we'll ever have to use it. But 700 litres per day is again a lot of water and should provide for that. So the only one that's specifically there is for leaks, unexpected leaks, on proof that you've fixed them. So that's the quick summary.
And
if
the
there
medical,
are any other specific
and medical
questions.
purposes.
And medical, yes.
Yeah, yeah. I've got Sarah, Melanie, Yanni.
Thank you. The other one that we had last time, and I've had a quick answer back just now, was around community uses for water. So we have several places around, or many places around the city where we have council reserve land where we're doing native plantings, or there's a community garden next door on council land, where the private residence is allowing their tap to be used to help water the natives growing in Drayton Reserve, for example, or at a community garden. And they are community activities that are of benefit to council and to the wider community, but it's an individual tap being used. And I'm wondering if there was a we did put this in last time, a specific exemption we would be able to use for people doing that, so that we have significant amount of council.
What we would prefer to
planting
do is
in.
to give them their own supply. So if they're on a separate title to that household that's letting them use their outside tap,
But it's a council, yeah.
we would prefer that they had their own supply if it's on a piece of council land. So parks and reserves, for example, usually have their own supply. So they're separately metered. And
Yeah, they
supplied.
often don't have a supply at all.
Well, what we would prefer to do is to give them their own supply. So they should come and talk to us, and we'll get their own supply point put in. Otherwise, that household, we have no way of monitoring that household's use. If
There's very few of them across the city. It seems like it would be easier just to exempt those properties than put.
It would be easier for us to manage the water use, to give them their own supply. It's relatively simple to do that.
Okay, can we see if we can get some parks advice on that maybe, just in the
we
next
we can
hour or
certainly
so?
work with parks and reserves to do that.
Yeah, thanks.
Yep. Melanie?
I mean, sorry to stop. I will keep harking back to last year in the annual plan, but is it true we were talking about an excess water charge for over 915 litres per day, and I realised that if people's rates were low, we were going to be charging them earlier on than those with higher rates. But we also had the large families included, so it doesn't quite add up to me.
So we've done some more work on patterns of use, and the high users are those with large gardens and irrigations or undetected leaks. There's very little correlation. There is some correlation with family size, but it doesn't push it over the 700 litres per day.
Well,
It's
then
the
there's
outside
no
garden.
harm. There's no harm in including, extra large households, is there? Because there's no harm in it. Because as you say, you've got the medical one in there. You might never need it.
What I would need to be very clear on is what do you mean by a large household? So if it's a flat, for example, with 12 people and they've all got their own en-suites, and there are some of those sort of workers' accommodation, is that a large household?
Yeah.
Or should we be charging them for the additional water that they're using?
You have to call it a family.
Well, that's once you start getting into an exemption like that, you start getting into a whole lot of questions about how you manage and monitor that exemption.
This is only if they get a bill over 700.
Yes, and there are a large number of very large properties with multiple occupants, which are sort of like boarding houses, workers' accommodation, which do get billed now under the commercial use.
Well,
and
that
some of
doesn't
those,
change.
well, and some do, and some of them are residential and wouldn't get billed. So we'd have to have a look at that pretty carefully.
Leanne, we've got a figure here of per person 234.8 litres a day average. If you had 6 kids and 2 adults, they could use up to 1,600.
No, that's not correct. So the averages are misleading. So that average per person is taking the average household use and then the average number of people in a household. So the average 6-person household doesn't use 6 times the average 1-person household, quite obviously. There are lots of different things going on in any one household. So it's not reasonable to multiply the average single person use by 6 for a 6-person household. It's not how it works.
Well, that's very helpful information, actually.
So just to not to cheese my very excellent officer off, but clearly it is your prerogative if you wish to see something added to the annual plan in terms of exceptions, and then you would task us with a way to achieve that to make sure it would work.
But it may be that we need more detailed information in the CD itself, which describes what the averages mean.
Yeah.
I think something should be included in case there is a case where it is actually applied. If we don't include it, we can't do it, and it would be unfair.
But isn't there, what about allowing for a discretion that enables staff to consider a situation like that, which is actually what I thought we were
We
doing.
could put in a discretionary one if you like, which would be around large families and financial hardship or medical grounds, or so we could wrap one single discretionary clause if you like.
I would recommend you do that.
Yeah, I think that solves the problem.
And that would get over the sort of multiple worker accommodation.
Can I just say financial hardship, though, is very hard to determine, and if a remission allows staff or puts it on staff to make a decision, then it's difficult to implement fairly. So how do you define financial hardship?
Well, I just think, look,
I'm not trying to be
I
difficult.
don't actually want to have a debate around here as to how to do that. There are provisions in a variety of pieces of legislation which allow, hardship or inequity to be a driver. So let's say take it offline, but you're getting a direction from us that we want the capacity for staff to be able to offer an exemption, where there are good reasons that sit in behind it, size of the family, personal circumstances, which includes the medical situation that you've described as well. Yeah, Yanni?
Oh yeah, thanks. I just wanted to check, so when did we start doing the quarterly readings? And when will we be in a position to have done all the quarterly readings across the city for the first time?
So we started quarterly readings late last year, and those are rolling out across the city at the moment. They're not universal at the moment, and in some places we can't find the meters, so there's a bit of, there are a few teething problems running on. Did you ask when we would be able to send out information?
What I'm really trying to understand is when will someone know over the quarter what their use has been?
So people can read their meters today. So we've got quite clear directions and instructions on our website on how to read your own meters. So if they want to do that, they can do that. Just look on the website and go and do it.
Yeah, no, I understand that.
When will we be sending notices out?
So what I'm trying to understand
is that the question?
Yeah, we started doing the quarterly reading. At what point do we get an assessment of what the average daily use has been for the readings that we started at the end of last year? So when will people know formally, when could people find out formally from us, if they wanted to, what their average daily use has been over the last quarter?
They can find out today if they email and ask, or phone up and ask. Not that I'm wanting 30,000 of them to phone up tomorrow. What we would like to do is, over the next 3 to 6 months, send notices out to people and let them know. And we're putting that in place at the moment because we've got a new contract going out for meter reading.
Right. Could it be done at the same time as the rates demand to save us on postage?
No, because we've got a rolling program of readings. So it's a different mechanism. We're billing on a rolling program of meter readings.
So just to confirm, so I want to make sure that the message has landed. The first time, if you agree at the appropriate time in June that you're going to adopt this, the first time the public will receive a bill is in summer 2022. That's correct, Helen?
Only if they go over.
So for the vast majority of people, that's the first time they'll receive a bill. For the few people who have major leaks on their properties, they may receive one almost immediately. However, if it's due to a major leak and they didn't know it was there and they fix it, we'll give them an exemption. But yes, for the vast majority of people, it'll be summer 2022.
I think you need to separate.
Just let me finish off that. But we will be informing the public, Helen, will we not, from go forward, what their usage has been on a quarterly basis before we get to summer 2022 to allow them to adjust their behaviour.
Yes, so what we'll do is let people know what their use has been, whatever the frequency of the meter reads have been. So some of them will have been quarterly for a year, some of them may not be for that long, but whatever readings we've got, we'll let them know what their average use is from those readings.
Yeah, it just...
So I think people will have plenty of information and time to adjust.
By the time it comes to hearing submissions, if people are making submissions to us saying, I'm really concerned about this proposal, I'm worried I'm going to be charged X amount in Z, will people have a sense of what their average daily use has been over the last summer quarter that we're currently in?
Yes, they can get in contact
Great.
and ask us,
Fantastic.
and we'll let them know. And a number of people did that last time for the annual plan hearings, and most of them didn't come and make a submission to you because most of them were within the allowance.
Yeah, right, great. And just so I'm really clear, the entire city's quarterly meter reading from start with the first reading to this is the end of the quarter, this is how much you've used, the first one of those will we complete when?
We're doing quarterly meter readings now, so we're rolling them out across the city now. So some people have already had maybe 3 readings. Most people will have had 1 or 2.
Sorry, it's the second one really that's the key. So the first one to work out what the current state is.
So, let's go back. So we have been reading meters in this city ever since they went in. But most residential ones only every 2 years, some of them every 1 year. So we already have data going back 10, 15 years. So now we have more frequent readings.
No, I understand it, sorry.
Okay.
Just to be really clear, the quarterly reading, the first one we do, we've done it.
Yes.
Then we do a second one so we can work out the average daily use.
For
the
that
quarter.
time of the year, yes.
Yeah. Just to be really clear, when, in terms of the entire city, will we have, or, recognising there's a few exceptions, but when will the first quarterly average results for an individual or a household be available?
They're available now, Yanni.
They're all available.
They're available
so
now.
we've done 2 quarterly reading, we've done 2 meter readings.
Most
for
people
a quarter
have 2,
for,
yes.
for everyone already. Great,
Yes.
thank you.
Right. Do you want to just, can you just touch on the 3 water reform process, because the consultation document, alerts us to the, or maybe it's not you, alerts us to the
bill.
But no, the 3 water reform process alerts us, the CD alerts everyone to the fact that the government's going through a process at the moment, and that this will mean that we are likely to be going out to the community again before the end of the year with a consultation on whether we buy into step 2, because it's an opt-out provision is what we're told it will be, and that the bill that will establish all of that is likely to be introduced in May, so it'll be before the end of the LTP. So the LTP, the consultation document, quite rightly informs the public that this process is going on, but one of the outcomes of that process may well be us going back out to our communities, asking whether they wish us to remain in or to opt out of the reform program.
Yes, so the water reform program is being run by central government, and Department of Internal Affairs is leading it, and they, as most people know, have signalled that they wish to see water services, that is water supply, wastewater management and possibly stormwater management, moved to a regional delivery model. So that when I say regional, I don't mean regional councils as we understand them.
Regional.
But yeah, so 4 to 8 delivery agencies across the country, or possibly fewer. So what they're doing at the moment is looking at what's required for the best outcomes for communities in terms of their water services. And when we say the best outcomes for communities, they're looking at all communities. And again, as you're probably quite familiar, most people in large towns and cities have very good drinking water and wastewater services, but quite a number of people in our much smaller rural towns and more village-sized towns don't have good access to good water supply and wastewater management services, and the outcomes for public health and for the environment have been very poor. And particularly, there are some particular incidents, of course, that people attention is drawn to. So that process, in terms of what is required to do that across the country, is running at the moment with some international assistance, and this council and a lot of other councils have provided information on who we deliver water services to, how we deliver those services in terms of the council and the contracted services, what the asset base is, what the needs are for investment, and that information is being considered across the country to look at the best delivery models. In parallel with that, the entities that deliver the water services are envisaged as standalone Crown entities under their own legislation. So that is, they are not council-controlled or council-owned entities in the way that Watercare is, for example, up in Auckland, which is entirely owned by the council and operated as a council-controlled entity. So these entities would be set up under their own legislation and have specialist boards. So the boards would reflect the communities that they serve and also have specialist expertise in terms of managing and governing water services, which is big business and specialist business.
So I think the important thing is, in relation to this LTP, both advice from Solgum and from central government as to why the wording is what is in our current LTP, and it will be outside of the decision timeline of this particular document. We will be having to work as an authority, as will every authority, to come to its conclusions about what we, i.e. you, wish to do, probably no later than the end of this calendar year, because the legislation won't go in until, I was about to say summer, but I do mean winter. I'm doing my Northern Hemisphere thing again. So it will be outside this timeline. And undoubtedly we will have to do the consultation process.
That's right, and central government have flagged that they will put a lot of effort into engaging with communities and engaging with iwi on what is proposed in terms of the reform. So they're not asking each individual council to do that themselves. Each individual council will do their own version of consultation and talking with their own communities, but it'll be in that wider context. So central government will provide a lot of information on the reform program and the reasons for it and what is proposed
And
for national consistency.
But to be really clear, this authority will remain responsible for the next 3 years for water, which is the lifetime of this LTP.
That's correct, yes.
So you're not abdicating your any responsibility.
That's right. And the other thing that central government has said that they will do is ensure that the process works well for local government. So if there need to be changes to the Local Government Act or any other legislation to enable this to happen without local government having to tie itself in knots around any transfer of assets or change in service levels, then central government will look at that and make sure that the transition process works well for everybody.
And of course all members have been invited to the roadshows that are in March.
23rd of March, I think it is, yes.
Yeah. I mean, I've just, I don't want to kind of frighten people, but in terms of the numbers that are being talked about by central government in terms of the underinvestment in the infrastructure, Three Waters infrastructure across the country, between $27 billion and $46 billion would lead to massive increases in the cost to household bills. And they had, I've just got a document in front of me which pleasingly, on one level, says that all local authorities in New Zealand were found to have been investing at a level below that needed to maintain the performance, condition and risk profile of their assets, except Christchurch. So Christchurch has been singled out, but I think that the part of that has been the investment that was undertaken as a result of the earthquakes. But I think that we collectively can take some credit for continuing to invest in our infrastructure. And I know that part of that has been driven off the desire to return to chlorine-free status. But I think that we're going to want advice from our officials as to what influence, if we were ultimately to end up with an independent company running the three waters, will we be in a position to put in place some obligation to maintain our commitment to safe drinking water that is also good to drink, which means without that residual disinfection in place. So that's the level of advice that we're going to need to offer that kind of reassurance and to our own community about what our priorities are.
Yeah, and that is recognised by central government, that local government is very keen on community involvement and community influence in the delivery of these services, because they are important to communities. So yes, I think that's a strong feature of the submissions on the bill from across local government.
Yeah, I know that the water services bill's coming to the Finance and Performance Committee on Thursday, and I'm going to save some of my commentary for that occasion. But there is the provision in there for the exemption, which which obviously we want to be in a position not only to apply for ourselves, but also to ensure that whatever structure is set up in the future, that there is a clear understanding that residual disinfection isn't the panacea to the appropriate provision of safe drinking water, which is our commitment, but from a secure source, not requiring that. So, but anyway, that's
back to the matter in hand.
Yes, Tim.
Sorry,
I remember your name now.
Oh, look, how could you forget me? Hey, look, a lot of comment with regards to community. But as we've seen with the RMA, the community has been distanced from any ability to really have a true say in that process. So I think we need, as a council and councils right through New Zealand, need really good and clear wording from central government how communities are going to be listened to and be able to be part of it and continue to be part of it as it goes forward. Because I can see this when we say reform, etc., and it's used quite a lot with the RMA, it's about reducing the ability of communities and loading the councils, local bodies, TAs, whatever, with the responsibility and being looked as the kicking board for that reduction in ability to comment. And I think that is a truly sad example of what central government's doing with the RMA. So that's for me, and I think for everyone on this table, the key there. Thank you.
We look forward as officers to the detailed debate you undoubtedly will have later on in the year on this matter.
Yeah. But we are going to have to go out and consult on it, because the provision that we are likely to be faced with is an opt-out provision. And when you opt out, what are the obligations that we're going to have to take on in order to maintain the level of standards that will be imposed also
and that's
by the regulator?
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. When we go to consult, we need to know what we're consulting on, and we need that direction from central government
Yeah.
So if I can ask members to come back to the matter we are dealing with on the agenda, would be really helpful. Thank you.
But it's
And it's
connected.
connected.
It is connected because I think people do need to understand that we are constrained in terms of what we're consulting on in relation to the three waters, because there is this additional engagement that is being undertaken at a central government level, but we are also taking on as a regional level. So within the Canterbury Mayoral Forum, we've instigated this work. We have been in the position to provide the information that central government has asked for in order to inform the next stage of the process, because I think we've been in a really good position, understanding our asset base and continuing to invest in our asset base in a way that's been very useful. So have we got any other questions?
Technical questions.
No?
Oh,
So
no.
I don't
Anne.
have questions about water. I have questions about just for the comms team, for Katie. So can we move on to that, or are we?
Leanne, can I ask that these are material to whether or not we accept the draft? Like, we've spent 90 to 100 hours giving direction and fleshing this out. And I think it's seriously worrying if we're at a point.
I'm just going to get to Sam in a minute, and he will present the audit and risk one.
But I think it's around whether you accept the draft or not and you're comfortable with it.
And then I'm going to have morning tea, and then we are going to debate the draft.
This is what we're here to do.
Thank you.
So
Thank you
am I
for your
able to-
help.
Yeah, Katie.
Anne.
Just the question, the challenge is always how do we engage meaningfully with our community about this document, which is extensive. And so just wondering if you could outline some of the strategies that you're going to use to gather the widest range of responses to this document when it's finally out in public. And I know that you've listed some already, but just it would be helpful to know how you're going to actually address things like English as a second language, those communities who don't perhaps traditionally engage with us.
Certainly. So we will be using all of our council channels to get the information out, recognising though that doesn't reach everyone. So we'll also be doing targeted specific engagement with certain communities that we know are going to be harder to reach. So we have some dates in the diary already with the youth sector, and we will also be looking to get into existing meetings for other organisations. Rather than trying to set up our own, we're hoping to dovetail in with other people's, because we always get better attendance. We will be, that said, we will be having a couple of drop-ins at Tūranga. We'll be inviting the public to come along. And we'll be looking at what we can do out in the community, working with governance teams and the community boards to set up some events out there. We will be producing a sort of like a A3 folded to A4 of information, which is a summary of the consultation document, just to make it a little bit more accessible. We'll be looking at how we translate certainly the call to action, the fact that it is LTP time. We probably won't be in a position to be able to translate huge amounts of documentation, but we will be making it very clear that it is the consultation time. And we'll be working through our existing stakeholder database to sort of like leverage where we can.
Katie, can you also add about the new tool we have devised, which we've tested with the community boards, because that is brand new?
Absolutely. So we have a new tool this year, which is which shows both capital and operational expenditures. So this is something that people can access online. It's a level of accessibility that we haven't had previously. So previously, you'll recall, if you'd like to find out anything in our long-term plan, you'll be looking through a 100 or so page PDF spreadsheet, which is not searchable. You will be able to use this tool to be able to search out projects that will be able to be searched by ward, by project title, and we're hoping it's really going to make things a lot more accessible for people to find out information.
That answers the question, my next question, which is exactly that. How do local people access their local information? So what does that tool look like, and how do people know about it?
So we'll be making sure that we're promoting that tool widely on all of our channels. It will be part of our launch strategy to make people very, very aware the resources available to them as part of this LTP consultation.
Fantastic. And what about community board plans? Will that be the sort of the task of the community board, if they have those local drop-ins, to have those plans there?
Yes, we'll be looking to community boards for support on that.
Thank you. Thanks very much. So, and thank you to staff I'll now move on to the Audit and Risk Management Committee, which met on Friday the 19th to discuss the process, and I'd like to invite Councillor MacDonald, who's the Deputy Chair of the ARMC, to present the committee's advice.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Leanne. Councillors, there's a memo on the hub for everyone as well already, which just talks through our process. I guess the point of this, like we talked about with the annual plan last year, was the audit and risk role in this. So it's not necessarily to offer a view on the content, but it's a view on the process that we've got to, and whether we're comfortable with the approach that's been taken by management and councillors through that. So I think, like I reiterated at the last one, we haven't come away with a resolution that says we're happy with the rates increase or the level of borrowing or things like that, but in fact actually that the steps we've taken as a council and with the management team to get there are comfortable. So there's just 3 recommendations there, which is obviously around noting it, and then, you know, comfort over the process around management sign-off. And just the third one, I don't think it's up on the screen, but it's really just around the consultation document. So obviously we had hoped to get that for Friday at Audit and Risk, just as part of the context to do it. But with the issues around, I guess, how that's being managed by Audit New Zealand, we've just noted there that that's still to come. So it hasn't affected our sign-off at all, noting that the Chief Executive and her team are working quite closely with Audit New Zealand to get that sorted. So yeah, there certainly weren't any flags from the committee on the day, and Kim Wallace, our independent chair, went through it thoroughly with our independent members and does send her apologies for today as well. So there's nothing really else to add, Leanne, if you're happy with that.
No, that's very good, thank you. So with that, can I move the recommendations that we have on the screen in front of us, and we have, and I'll just quickly run through them, that we're receiving the information that's been contained and referred to in the staff report and the documents attached to it, noting the recommendations of the Council's Audit and Risk Management Committee, adopting the information that provides the basis for the Council's draft LTP and relied on by the content of the consultation document, noting that the full version of the information can be found on the website, adopts the Mayor's proposal as outlined in Attachment A, adopts the consultation document in principle, and this is in principle because of the requirement to have a later meeting at which point the formal adoption will occur. So that isn't a point to sort of relitigate anything, it's simply the formal adoption once we have the Auditor General's report as required by Section 93C4 of the Local Government Act, authorises the General Manager of Finance and Commercial and the Chairperson of Audit and Risk to make any non-material amendments to the documents, and then approves the following process for consultation. You've just heard from Katie, so that was very helpful. Consultation available to the public on the 12th of March. This is now subject to when the final sign-off, but this is the plan. If the final sign-off's on the 4th, the period for making submissions running through to the 18th of April, and for people who wish to, opportunities are then provided to present oral submissions, and oral submissions being heard between the 3rd and the 19th of May, and then all going well, the Council meeting and confirming and adopting the long-term plan on the 21st and or the 23rd of June, whatever is required. And I think that's the full list. So I'll move that, and Andrew will second it.
Paragraph 5, typo mistake. It's a 2021. The one is 2020.
Oh, very good.
Paragraph 5. Oh, wait, paragraph 6. Paragraph 6. On 4.
Oh,
March.
well done. Well done. No, give that man a chocolate fish. That's that was very good.
If those timeframes change, do we just manage that, or do we have to rescind that, or
no,
we just manage it?
That's just can we approves the following process for consultation, subject to dates being confirmed once the at the point of formal adoption.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So that's been, sorry?
If you wish to debate the rating basis and move away from a UAGC, then that will actually impact on the financial data and the financial strategy. So you would need to have that debate before you adopt that staff report.
Well, I didn't have the amendment before the meeting, so no, I wondered whether it was going to be possible to do that within the time frame, but it's just not possible. But I mean, it isn't the end of the opportunity. This is the draft, and I'm sure that there will be submissions that will come in on the subject, and we will have the opportunity to debate that fully in the context of the final adoption of the LTP. Are people generally comfortable with that approach? Good. So I'm going to adjourn for morning tea, and we will reconvene at 11:30.